Hello, and a huge, fabulous welcome to the man, the myth, the legend, the freedom maximalist, Greg Foss. Welcome aboard to Bitcoin People.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you.
It's gorgeous to be here, Greg. There's loads that I want to ask you about. There's a lot going on in the markets at the moment. There's a lot of big news coming out this week that we can expect some volatility from, but actually, I'm not that fussed about short-term movements, and except to the degree that they imply anything about the speed at which the fiat system is unraveling.
Mhm.
But before we get there, I'd actually like to explore, as I often like to do on Bitcoin People, a little bit about you and your background, not just professionally, but personally. And so to that end, I'd love to learn just a little bit about you and your upbringing, because this is the stuff we don't get to hear much about online.
Appreciate the question. So thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. So I'm close to 60. I'll be 60 next year. And boy, 60 years passes pretty quickly. But I was born in 1963. I grew up in Montreal, Canada. Um, I was actually an English Quebecer in a French province. Just to put things in context, there's about 1 million English speaking Quebecers, about 6 to 7 million French speaking Quebecers. Um, the English community in Montreal is pretty tight, probably 4 degrees of separation. It doesn't take you more than 4 people. You figure out who knows it, everybody. Really cool community, but a little bit definitely on the edge. There were always friction between the French and the English. Not all the time, but it's part of your upbringing.
Mm.
I love sports. Good Canadian kid, played hockey, played rugby, played football, North American football, and didn't care much about life. When I was 18 years old, I focused mostly on sports. I was decent enough in school to be able to study sciences, but I can't say they interested me uh, over any other opportunity. But math always came somewhat easily to me, not as easy as perhaps a Michael Saylor rocket science, but easy enough that I was able to get accepted at an engineering university in Canada called McGill, which is it's a globally renowned engineering school. I went there to play sports, but I said, well, I might as well take engineering. If I'm good enough to be there, I can always switch from engineering back to business, but you can never switch from business to engineering. All the credits that you get in business, they're not transferable back to engineering. So
Wow.
I went, and wouldn't you know, after 4 years, I stayed in engineering, and I found myself wondering, what in the world did I just do? I studied for 4 years, but I don't want to be an engineer. Um, and
What didn't attract you about that? Why?
It's just, I don't feel like designing jet engines for Pratt and Whitney, working on a jet turbine engine, or, there's lots of engineering jobs that morph into sales and then you become in management. But I guess I always liked school, and I said, well, maybe I'm going to try this thing called an MBA. And I was lucky enough I had about $200 to my name, and that's about what it costs to apply to one business school in the US. And I ended up applying to Cornell University, which is an Ivy League school in upstate New York, about a 5 to 6 hour drive from Montreal, a world of difference apart, but close enough you can drive there. Great school. They happen to be building a international business school program. So while they were a top 20 business school, I never would have gotten into the Cornell without any work experience if I was applying from the USA. But the fact that I was applying from Canada, I got lucky enough to get accepted. I went down and I lived with a bunch of undergrads, and that was very important because I'm actually going to Las Vegas this weekend to still hang out with some of the guys I lived with at
Mm.
Cornell over 30 years ago. Um, but these were undergrads that happened to be in the same fraternity I was in. So the common link was a fraternity at McGill, a fraternity at Cornell. They had an extra room. I rented a room off campus with them. I was in the grad school, but hung out with the undergrads. Had the time of my life. got to know the difference between the cultures between Canada and the USA. They are substantial.
Yeah.
And then a sad note, one of my roommates from that great group, he was killed in the World Trade Center in 2011. So, you know, I've experienced some of the horrors of the USA as well. Suffice to say, though, that I like math. I stuck with engineering because the math side of it interests me, but math is very important when you go into finance, and that's where I found my career. I came back to Canada. I could have worked on Wall Street, but I wanted to make a mark in Canada somehow, and so I found my way back to Canada, and I have been here in Canada, trading predominantly with Wall Street, though, out of Canada. But I have worked on Wall Street. I've lived in the United States. I'm a huge fan of the USA. No country's perfect, but they're about as perfect as you can ask for as a freedom maximalist, which I am. They encompass the values that I hold so dearly as a freedom seeker. So, yeah, I came back to Canada, 1988, and wow, in a flash of a career, after 30 years, I retired from the hedge fund business because I had hit a wall. We can talk about that later. I hit an emotional wall after 30 years of sitting in a risk chair, the pressures of managing money, pressures of financial markets. So, in 2016, I found Bitcoin, and we can talk about that as well. But basically, if I had to summarize what I did for 30 years, I managed risk. I wasn't the world's smartest trader. I wasn't the world's best trader, but I tried to make things, tried to always find out where I could be wrong, test my thesis. If I was wrong, I didn't become stubborn. I just said, okay, I've made a mistake. Time to exit this position. Don't build a deeper hole or dig a deeper hole. So everything I've learned is, based on how you manage your mistakes. If no one made any mistakes, they'd be no smarter for it. But you got to learn how to manage your mistakes. That's the number one rule of managing risk. Don't ever think you're bigger than the market. The market will humble you very quickly, and grasp opportunities that you have to make the most of an opportunity when it comes, because they don't come all the time. And as I like to say, Bitcoin is the greatest asymmetric investment opportunity I've ever seen in 35 years. I can run through the math with you, but I'll just say I'm not 100% certain, but I'm way more certain than the odds that the market are giving me in terms of the final value of Bitcoin. And I need to do that because my generation is generally a selfish generation, right? The baby boomers are soft. We have pulled forward gains at the expense of our children. We never pay our debts. We're really quite, we're nowhere near like the great generation or the greatest generation that fought 2 world wars. We are very soft. We're out of shape. We're predominantly white. We're fucking the world up, and we're costing the future for our children. So I'm trying to, stop that mistake and make amends as the opportunities present.
Good for you. So many different questions coming out of this. I'm just gonna, the immediately presenting question is, do you think that selfishness and that fucking up of the world is anything to do with being white and male, or is it more to do with simply growing up in a generation that saw the greatest prosperity and peace that any civilization has probably ever known?
Yeah, a bit of both. I'm not really that much of a philosopher or I am spiritual, but I'm not that religious. I do believe everything happens for a reason. There are expressions like tough times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men. You know how that, or people, right? I'm not trying to say men or women.
Sure.
Look, I'm I'm allowed to say fat white because that's who I am, right? Like I'm not calling it, I'm fat, I'm white, I'm male, I'm 60 years old. Um, and yes, my generation has been selfish, and there's no other way to say it. Like, you know, we have been lucky enough never to have to fight a conscription war. Um, we have lived in a very prosperous age, but we haven't paid our debts. And that's what really bugs me,
Mm.
because it's fine to be to live the good life as long as you pay your debts. But to live the good life and not pay your debts and leave that burden for your children is actually pretty sick, right? Like it's
Yeah.
actually very weak. There's nothing to be proud of there. In fact, it should make you feel quite uh disgusted with your own behavior, but most people just take it for granted. They feel entitled, and this is part of the problem I have with this entitlement. I love people who work hard. People who work hard should reap the benefits of hard work, and there's no shame in that. What I have a problem with is people that don't work hard but feel like they're entitled to live a life that you know, just because they happen to grow up in a prosperous time for the world, or some other people are making money, so let them pay for me just because I'm not working hard enough to make my own money. And I don't want to say, you know, the social programs don't have value. They absolutely do, but there's the, you know, pushing, toing and froing on all fronts. But if you just go back to the values that my granddad and my father imparted in me, hard work. My granddad fought in both world wars. He was awarded the Order of the British Empire, which is a very prestigious medal for bravery. Only 800 non-UK citizens have been awarded that medal. I think they've only awarded it somewhere around 4,000 times, and 800 were to non-UK citizens, of which my granddad was one. Like, I'm very proud of that. My granddad would actually be very disgusted with, you know, the softness of the current population. He tried to instill some solid values in my dad, and then that trickled down to me. No one's perfect. We're allowed to make mistakes. We're just not allowed to make the same mistake again and again and again, and then pretend that if we do it differently, we'll get it. Well, if we do the same thing often enough, we'll get a different result. You don't get a different result. Like, I mean, you have to pay your debts. Printing more money to pay your debts is not a solution to going further into debt. So that's where Bitcoin comes along. I spent my life trading trading credit. Credit runs the world. I've seen 4 different financial crises in my life. We're into our 5th one right now, and this 5th one might be the most uh, severe of any of them, only because the pressure in the system has grown and grown and grown with each successive crisis. We haven't solved anything. We've just kicked the can. So, you know, those 4 crises were, I started in 1988. It was started with Latin American debt. Then 1998 was long-term capital management. Then 2008 was the great financial crisis. Then the COVID crisis, and now we're into the sovereign debt crisis. That's where we are right now. And all I will say is that each successive crisis becomes more severe. There's nowhere else to push the responsibility. It starts in the financial system. They push it up to the governments, but now it's all at the government level. And there's nowhere else to kick it. There's no one that can bail out the government. So that's where we are. Bitcoin is our only salvation. All paths lead to Bitcoin. It doesn't matter whether we have an inflation, we have deflation, we have recession, we have pivot, all of the paths, doesn't matter. It all leads to Bitcoin. That's why it's such a simple investment thesis, in my opinion. Takes education. You've been kind enough to work with our, excuse me, our group at Looking Glass Education. They've told me you've done some amazing stuff. I appreciate that. Haven't seen it yet, but that's all about. It's all about educating, Kerry. It's all about telling the truth, because you don't learn it in school, because they can't teach you this in school, because people would be like, come on, this is just so wrong. So they want to continue the Ponzi by not telling you how it actually works and requiring you to do your own homework. And all I will say is, as you peel a layer, you have to keep learning. You have to understand that you won't learn this in school, even an Ivy League school in the USA. Top quality education 35 years ago, I learned nothing about the true riskiness of the global banking system, because they can't. If they did, you wouldn't deposit your money in the banks because you'd be like, wow, these things are actually pretty dangerous. But here's where we are. Try and teach the truth. We have to, because the world that we're leaving for our children is a lot worse than the world that I was lucky enough to grow up in. So trying to help make the world a better place.
Talking about, I did economics at uni, and we didn't get this kind of education. And I've obviously, as soon as you start going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you discover a whole lot of stuff that, as you say, isn't taught in schools. This doesn't actually matter at one level, but I'm curious to know your thoughts. To what degree do you feel like this has been a deliberate, to what degree do you feel people knew what they were doing and deliberately didn't pay their debts, deliberately kicked their, it feels to me like, to begin with, it wasn't. To begin with, they actually, the intention was good and they were hoping they were doing the right thing. And then they got themselves into a hole that they couldn't get out of. And now they're sort of stuck in a position where they absolutely knowingly and deliberately are exacerbating what was already a giant mess. And now there's no excuses. But I almost feel like at the beginning, there was a sense of being well-intentioned and it couldn't be taught because it wasn't understood.
Correct. You know, the point of no return gets measured as a percent of total debt to GDP, your ability to pay back your debt.
Yeah.
And the problem is we have 4-year government terms by and large. And, you know, to solve this problem requires a multi-decade commitment. But, excuse me, you're not going to get that commitment out of a 4-year term government that probably won't win the next election because of the fiscal austerity that's required to get you to this point. They'll lose the next election, and the people that'll come in will just say, well, we'll reverse that because I actually want to work here for this term plus next term potentially, right? So it's a bit of a confluence of the reality of an election cycle versus the reality of an economic cycle or a debt cycle. Debt cycles that go 50 to 100 years, election cycles which go 4 years. Yeah. And then you deal with stuff that when you have a total debt to GDP like 40 years ago that was only 30% of gross domestic product, you have that buffer where you can, you know, provided you had the discipline to take your foot off the gas and pay back the debt. That's how it's supposed to work. What happens is when you don't have the discipline to fill up the coffers or pay down the debt, and then another crisis hits and your only response is to get more debt, well, you haven't paid back the debt you were supposed to have paid back before. Some of the worst stuff that galls me is when the government says stuff like, well, this program is paid for. You know, the Democrats in the US, and I'm not saying Republican or Democrats. The fact is the Democrats were saying, well, this program is paid for. This school bill, you know, the forgiveness of student loans is paid for. Okay, it's only paid for if you ignore all the other debts that you've already accumulated that you're not paying for. Okay, like stop thinking that we are silly 4-year-old kids that will believe your gibberish about debts being paid as long as you ignore all the other debts that we've accumulated up until now, right? They assume that we're buffoons. I guess when you are a buffoon, which is what generally the politicians are in every single country in the world, it seems like there's an endemic of very poor government politicians. But that being said, we need another, even if Ronald Reagan came back, though, I'm not sure. The math is nobody can solve this. So there's I'm not sure if even Ronald Reagan could solve this right now. The only thing that can solve it is Bitcoin. That's the fact. And that's why I just have to get on these soapboxes and tell people, do the math. You could be the most well-intentioned person in the world. You cannot beat the mathematics of a coupon on your debt that is expanding the debt balloon faster than you can ever hope to expand your economy to keep pace with the organic growth of your debt balloon. It's so simple. And yet, I don't know, people still think they can get it done. Well, you can't get it done. That's why all paths lead to Bitcoin. And having spent my careers in the credit markets, it's amazing how often even credit professionals miss some of these warning signs. Anyway, that's what you have to do is you got to get out there and you got to bang the drum and shake a few trees. You got to tell the truth. You got to swear a little. You got to open some eyes. You got to fight. I'll go into anybody's barn and I'll fight for Bitcoin. If it's a crypto barn and they're crypto, I'll go, I don't care, man. I'll go into your house and I'll fight for Bitcoin. I'll fight people who hate Bitcoin. I'll embrace people who love Bitcoin, but we don't always have to see eye to eye. If we all, there's a great Patton quote. He says, George Patton said, if we're all thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. Even if we're on the same team, we can't all be thinking alike. We have to, poke holes in each other's thought processes, thesis, etc. And this is part of, bringing it back to the Looking Glass education platform, involved with your friend, who I've never met, but Daz, and I don't even know how to say his last name. Maybe you could help me. I call him Bayan or whatever, but it doesn't matter.
I think he
He's an
just goes
Aussie.
by Dasby.
Baz Bay.
Yeah.
But here's the cool thing is he's an Aussie. We have a kid from New Zealand who lives in Whistler, Canada, working on it. We have your input because why? Because you're a good person who's trying to help the platform grow and gain acceptance around the world. And that's the only way we're going to do this is by pushing down, resisting, the ivory towers and all the stuff that have led us down this wrong path. We have to fight. And it's a peaceful protest.
Yes.
It's the most peaceful protest possible. It's beautiful. And it encapsulates freedom, the best I could describe.
I had a different but vaguely similar experience to you in financial markets. I was working on the fixed interest desk. I was reading The Great Reckoning.
Okay.
You remember Rees-Mogg and Davidson, and I got depressed not just by the atmosphere of financial markets, because I worked in a really grotesque kind of 1980s Wolf of Wall Street, not quite as bad, but it was that kind of environment and it wasn't my happy place at all.
Right.
But over and above that, I was hyper aware of what was going on financially around me. My mother, of all things, who passed this year, but still heavily into macroeconomics to the day she died. And she was the one who actually put me onto The Great Reckoning all those years ago. I was not only immediately uncomfortable in my surroundings, but deeply depressed by the sense of hopelessness about the world. And so what's happened for me with Bitcoin, God love COVID and the world's longest, worst, harshest lockdowns in the world here in Melbourne, Australia, I could only keep up my business of 26 years for the first 18 months of and I did, I pivoted and I went online and everything was great, but then we opened up and clients said, let's get back into the offices and let's do some work together. And then we got locked down again. So we rescheduled. Anyway, so this went on. So then I needed to find a different source of income. So then I started, trying to trade shit coins and, came for the gains and all of that stuff. And then, of course, you came for the game, stayed for the revolution, and started to go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And for me, at the ripe old age of somewhere between you and Jeff Booth, so I'm smack bang in the middle of you, I have hope for that. I am not kidding, for the first time in my life. For the first time in my life, I feel a sense of hope for the world, and it might take 100 years to play out. And I'm curious about your emotional kind of journey from where it was for you at the end of 30 years in the credit markets, and what kind of has happened for you emotionally around Bitcoin?
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience. I'm a pretty intense person. And they asked me when I was young what I loved about trading. And I would describe it like this. When you have a big, game, some sporting event, and you have butterflies in your stomach, and, I said, I felt like that every single day going to work. And that's fun until it isn't, until that nervousness just beats up your body and beats up your defense mechanism, because fight or flight, that's your human defense mechanism. But if you're playing with it every day, where your adrenal glands are tense because you're in a trade situation or whatever. And it didn't happen every day, but for sure there were long stretches of bad times and then some good times, but you're still intense. It weighs on you. It has to. It's like playing, always being on your game. And so I did this for 30 years. I was able to suppress it for the first parts of my career. There were times, for example, when I had to go get a stress test because I thought I had a heart attack in the middle of the night. Ran on a treadmill and everything in front of a doctor. And then a little bit of a funny story. The nurse is like, okay, stop running. And I'm like, well, what's the matter? Oh, there's nothing matter, but stop running. And then she calls the doctor. Doctor, can you get down here immediately? And I'm like, well, what the hell's going on? She's like, don't worry, there's nothing wrong. But clearly I could tell in her voice that they had identified a heart arrhythmia or something in my situation. So basically, the truth is I wrestled with it, but I was able to suppress it. Okay. And this is the anxiety. This is the you're sitting in the middle of the night, you wake up from a dream, you ask your wife, who did I just sell 20 million of these bonds to? And she goes, the phone didn't ring. And you go, no, don't tell me the phone didn't ring. I just sold 20 million of Shaw Communications bonds. I don't remember who I sold them to. She's like, okay, Greg, you got to calm down. I promise the phone didn't ring, So you're going through this stuff at the middle of the night. These are the pressures that your body's going through. Anyway, I did this for an awful long time. And then we had just completed our best trading year ever coming out of the great financial crisis. We had played the market perfectly. We were short subprime on the way in, and then we covered, and then we got long some stuff on the way up. And anyway, after a 5-year restructuring trade in 2016, I'd absolutely had enough. Our hedge fund had been bought by another asset manager, and I was literally at the edge of a mental breakdown. It was a combination. I had family stresses going on as well. Both my parents had died in short order. I'm the oldest in my family. My son was playing really competitive hockey. I lived vicariously through him, his up and downs in his career, including aspirations to go to the National Hockey League, and all these things. You live with your son and you live with your family, and then you're already predisposed to this type of these types of stresses because you are a type A plus personality, and you just don't do well if you're not winning. Like, I don't deal well with not winning. That's just my nature. So, like it builds up and builds up. So I tapped out. I'm like, I gotta leave this business. I gotta take care of my family, both my parents who had passed away. I got to take care of that part of the family. I got to take care of my kids. Time for me to put first things first. I put money away, and then COVID hit. And that's when it was really bad for me too, because one of the investments I had made over my 25-year career, I should say 25 years ago, was I invested in Irish pubs in Montreal, my hometown. And they grew to a sizable chain where I was able to count on the dividends of those pubs to maintain a degree of a lifestyle, except when COVID hits. And
of course,
all of a sudden that goes to zero, because they give you government funding for the employees, but they don't care about the owners. Like, well, screw the owners, right? They're not getting any dividends, but they're rich enough anyway, right? So anyway, I had a financial challenge there. I hit the wall. I was probably taking the wrong medication, self-diagnosed. I was taking the wrong medication that was actually enhancing my volatility.
oh, no.
So I was able to figure that out over a period of, a very tough period where, yeah, I didn't want to stay alive. And that is a horrible thing when you have a great wife and 3 great kids. You can't believe that your mind can do that to you. But I did. I have to say, in 2016, I found Bitcoin, but I never researched it to the extent that it helped me come out of this downturn. And 2020, 19, 20, 21, chipping away, understanding, believing in this system to the extent I got to meet people, you mentioned Jeff Booth, who's become one of my closer buddies. We just finished traveling around Europe together with him and his wife and his two kids, two of his three children. What a great family that I get to meet because of this awesome Bitcoin community, right? So all of this, Carrie, we have challenges. I'm no different. I said on stage in Miami, yeah, look, I was suicidal. That's fine. Bitcoin provides me hope. Yep, that's totally honest. It provides me a passion that I need in my life as well. When you stop managing money competitively, you have a void in your life. It's like you can't stop doing something. There's only so much golf you can play. Plus, I hate the game; it drives me crazy. So, you know what I mean? Like it's all these things that you look for other things to fill that void. And this Bitcoin community, we don't know each other, but I feel like you and I are cut from the same cloth a little bit. Like we mentioned, Daz. I still haven't met him, but man, the work he's doing with Looking Glass Education. I mean, this is real stuff. Helping the kids in El Salvador. I mean, we're donating money to the schools in El Salvador to help them succeed and escape this U.S. dollar. We'll call it the ball and chains of a U.S. dollar system. So it's been cool. We will never, you got to be careful too. And, I say to myself, like, we have this in our bodies. It's never gone. So you got to be careful that you don't let it become, self-controlling again. You got to exercise. You got to do all the stuff that's allows you to release those pressure valves. And that being said, you become wiser. You look for the signs that maybe you're taking shit a little too seriously there, Foss. I mean, now it's time to, and by the way, don't go drinking because drinking makes it worse. You have a short-term solution. Here I am drinking a beer though. But the point is, like, don't have 18 beers because that's going to make you feel good for 3 hours, but then it's going to depress you for the next, 4 days. These are all the things you have to learn to deal with. And it's part of the Bitcoin discipline. I mean, being a Bitcoiner requires a tremendous amount of discipline, and that is represented in various other ways in people's lives. Some of the most disciplined people I've ever met, whether they're in weight loss, whether they're in mining fiat to invest in discipline in Bitcoin, whether they're trying to start organizations, make the world a better place. I'm telling you, this Bitcoin army, peaceful army, is one of the most powerful and pure good that I've met. Having worked on Wall Street, where 99% of the world are takers, it's wonderful to be involved in a community where I'd say at least 85% of the Bitcoin community are givers, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it. How hopeful are you? Where's things at politically in Canada and also the US? I know we've got a couple of senators in the US on board. I know that Booth's doing some good work with some of your Canadian politicians. Is this going to happen? Like you said, you're reasonably sure it's got the best chance of anything out there, but at this stage it feels like a pipe dream still for me.
Okay, well, I'm an optimist, but I'm also a statistician, if you will. I like math. I look at things. Let's look at some math that may give you a bit more comfort. Well, let's look at El Salvador first. Then we'll look at the global adoption of Bitcoin. Okay. And then we'll look at the reality of the current fiat system. But starting with El Salvador, there's a country that there's only 6 million people. The president had the guts to embrace a Bitcoin standard. And he bought a bunch of Bitcoin for the US, for his treasury. And he's lost about 50 million bucks on that Bitcoin. Like, that's a lot of money, but for a treasury, it's not do or die. And conversely, his economy, which is $28 billion economy, has grown by 10%, predominantly because of tourism. So his top line has grown by $2.8 billion. And let's just say that the revenues on $2.8 billion, the tax revenues, let's put to make the math easy, we'll put a 40% tax rate on that. So 40% of 2.8 billion incremental revenues is $1 trillion of increased tax revenues. Oh, sorry, it's a bit 2.8 billion, and then that's $1 billion.
Right.
And he's lost 50 million.
Yeah, right.
Okay, like you've made 1,000 millions and you've lost 50 million. I think you're doing pretty good. Okay, so that's El Salvador. And other countries, it's 6 million people. I think that you can probably figure this out, that yeah, you're allowed to lose 50 million in order to make 1,000 millions. Okay, of incremental tax revenue. Okay, so that's good. The people are, for the first time in a while, they believe they have a fighting chance to materially improve their standard of living. All things point to increased adoption in El Salvador, and good things to come. Credit card fees, you know, remittances, all of these things are adding to the bottom line of of El Salvador. And you know, Western Union, they're shit out of luck. Okay, good, because it's a shitty business. I mean, they're, you know, it's rent seeking. The credit card fees in El Salvador are 8% merchant fees versus 2% in the Western world. So there's where you should use Bitcoin, because if you're a restaurant operator, and you know, we're a good restaurant operator in Montreal, we make 14 cents on every dollar of revenue. When someone pays with a credit card, our profitability goes from 14 cents down to 11.5 cents. But in El Salvador, if you're a good operator, you make 14 cents and someone pays with a credit card, your profitability goes down to 6 cents, because that 8 cents goes to the merchant fee. These are things that Bitcoin will help disintermediate. So that's at the country level. Then we'll look at global adoption. Some statistics say that there's 170 million Bitcoiners in the world, which compared to 8 billion people in the world is pretty small. Let's do that math in our head. So let's say it was 20, say it's 200 million, 1/5 of 8. It's like 1/40th. We're at 2.5% penetration in the whole world, 2.5% or less. But if that 170 million were all in one country, that would put that country within the top 10 countries in the world by population. Oh, that's pretty cool. So we can look at Bitcoiners as being a distributed country. We don't have borders, but we have a group of people that are rowing in the same direction. So that's adoption on a global scale. And then we'll look at this crazy fiat Ponzi we live in, where you have banks like Credit Suisse and First Boston that, you know, they're in a world of hurt. And there's a chance that if, sorry, I said Credit Suisse and First Boston, Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse, or Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank. If Deutsche Bank were to experience financial distress, Germany would have to, and they are experiencing financial distress, the degree to which will come to be seen. If Germany has to bail them out, then Germany becomes less of a sugar daddy to the Italys of the world that can't afford to stand on their own because they've borrowed too much money. And now the only thing that's keeping them off of life support is the German affiliation. So we have, on the one hand, a positive system that's growing. And on the other hand, we have a fiat system that's dying on the vine and increasingly wilting because it's just the mathematics of the debt spiral. I mean, it's pretty obvious to me which side's going to win. It won't be linear, and it won't be without some fights, but I like the odds of the Bitcoin side of the trade with education. I mean, this is my third podcast of the day today, and you know, that's good, but it's draining a little bit because I actually do have a job as well. I don't get paid. I don't get paid for that job. I don't get actually paid for it. So I have a lot of fun doing it, but I'm a shareholder. So that's how I have to get paid. But what I'm trying to say, Carrie, is like meeting people like you. It keeps me young. I'm not sure if you know who Larry Lepard is, but he and I were also traveling around.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Larry Lepard. Yeah, Larry Lepard. And Larry, you know, he's a couple of years older than me even, and he's like, man, Foss, he goes, this keeps me young. You know, we get to meet great people. We believe in what we're doing. He's pretty darn successful. Like, he doesn't have to work. And he does it though because he cares. And this is why I keep doing it. I like to think I care as well. I want to leave this place better than when I arrived. I am proud to be a freedom maximalist. Bitcoin is freedom. Bitcoin is hope. It's the ability to fess up to your own mistakes. Give yourself, if you get knocked down, you pull yourself up and you get back on that horse and you try and solve the problems. You don't run from them. You don't print money. You don't cower in your own basement playing metaverse bullshit games that Mark Zuckerberg wants the world to turn into. I think that, we have a chance to reverse the narrative. Bitcoin is front and center in that. I want to be part of it.
It seems to me as I do these interviews, and I'm only up to interview number, whatever it is, 13, 14, 15, it's really early days in a very tiny podcast. But there's some real themes. And I saw you in Miami. I came over from Melbourne, Australia on my own, deliberately to see you and Booth and all the big guys and Sailor and Mallers. And I find that there's some common themes in the people, common values, some certain common characteristics in the Bitcoiners that I meet, whether it be in Miami or whether it be on the podcast, of curiosity, willing to test our own theses, willing to be humbled and admit when we're wrong. And there is a humility about this because there's, as you say, there's no guarantees, willing to live in that uncertainty, that unknown. But for this to become a global, whether you call it standard or whether you call it hyper-Bitcoinization, this has got to get beyond freedom maximalists. It's got to get beyond the people who are currently drawn to Bitcoin for all the reasons we're drawn to Bitcoin, the transparency and the peer-to-peer and the, I mean, I hear the merchant story and that getting rid of the visa costs, and that inspires me because I'm small business and I feel very strongly about small business and I have a very strong sense of personal responsibility and do it yourself and nobody's there to save you. But if this is going to reach the rest of the world, if this is going to get more widespread, we've got to get beyond the people with that particular group of characteristics.
Yeah, it's a process. There's a lot of deeply ingrained fiat, people who are paid not to understand, right, Carrie?
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of people who are paid not to understand, because if they did, then they'd basically be crapping all over their money-making career, right? Wall Street is a service business that makes money by shaving off a fee between buyer and seller. And if that fiat Ponzi fails to, or, doesn't exist to the degree it does today, then they're materially worse off. So they are paid not to understand. That's the reality. Jamie Dimon, it can't possibly be that stupid. All right. If he honestly is that stupid running the USA's largest bank, then we're in really big trouble. So I prefer to believe that he's not stupid. He's just conflicted. And by telling lies, he might be doing the best things for his shareholders, but he's not doing the best thing for his kids. So it's a conflicted situation. Hopefully he has a degree of moral code that will cause him some shame and some embarrassment and even some anxiety or depression by preaching those lies to continue the fiat Ponzi. Then again, he lives on Wall Street. He doesn't have to listen to me. At the end of the day, like, he's made his billions, and I think there's a lot of people like that though. Charlie Munger, I mean, he's paid not to understand. He owns too many bank shares for him to embrace Bitcoin, because Bitcoin will disintermediate those bank stocks. And I mean, this is the problem. It's never easy, but you got to tell the truth. You got to call out the liars. Jamie Dimon, shameful. Charlie Munger, okay, time will take care of him. I joke that Charlie Munger shouldn't buy green bananas because he might not be around in time to eat those bananas, right? But you got to call it out as it is, because that's just not honorable. And yeah, I'll do it. I don't have any risk in that. They can't fire me. And I have 3 kids, and you know what? I care more about those kids than I care about what you might think of me. You conflicted old donkeys, okay? Because that's what they are, conflicted old donkeys.
I've heard you say this. Isn't there a game going around? It's like the Foss bingo, so that when we get that.
That's it. That's one of my bingo
Some
squares.
of the Fossisms. We need a little quote
Yeah.
book, a little book of quotes of
Yeah, well,
Foss.
maybe your listeners hopefully haven't heard these before, but yeah, I'll keep saying them. And a lot of times,
Yeah,
Carrie, I
as
joke,
you
I go,
should.
because, well, sometimes you need to say it more than once for it to sink into people as well. So,
Yeah, not kidding, not kidding. Are we seeing, I'm getting conscious of your time and I do want to wind it
okay.
up, but are we seeing an uptake? Are we seeing people at the institutional level beyond, someone like Saylor, who's obviously got his own vested interest?
No question.
Are we seeing uptake at the political level? Are we seeing uptake at
Yeah.
the financial institution level? Are you seeing signs?
Yes. I mean, I was in touch with the top 5 Canadian pension plan 2 weeks ago that said to me, basically, look, you'd be surprised how much work we're doing on this. They have to, though. They've been absolutely decimated in their 60-40 portfolio, 60% debt, 60% equities, 40% bonds, down double digits on both of those strategies. First time in 40 years that they've had negative returns across both strategies. Pension plans are in big trouble. You saw what happened in the United Kingdom. They tried to lever their returns. I will just say that yes, you have to do this work, because assets, in many cases, will not offer the returns that are required for you to meet your pension obligations. And then it becomes a competitive thing. I mean, if Fidelity does it and BlackRock doesn't do it, it's not surprising that BlackRock has embraced Bitcoin and digital assets, because they saw Fidelity gaining traction. 58% of Fidelity's accounts are invested in digital assets. Do you think BlackRock doesn't want to offer digital assets and restrict themselves to those 42% that don't have digital assets for now, but are probably going to grow into it? Because that's the other part of the Fidelity questionnaire, was of the 58% that have it, 42% don't have it. Of the 42%, what percentage plan to have it within the next year? And something like 76% of the 42% that don't have it. So these numbers are astounding. Again, if you compare adoption to cell phones and the internet and everything, we're in good shape. There's enough smart money out there that realize they have to do some different stuff, because the old stuff this year has been absolutely, fatal. More money has been lost this year, something like $92 trillion of global wealth. That compares to only 17 trillion that was lost in the great financial crisis. Are you kidding me? Almost 5 times as much money has been lost this year as was lost in the great financial crisis. Whoa. I mean, these are real numbers, Carrie, that we have to be cognizant of. So I don't want to be the doom and gloomer. I want to end on a positive note. And the positive note is just, look, do your homework. Don't own zero Bitcoin. Owning zero Bitcoin is far more risky than having a proper portfolio allocation. It is the best asymmetric upside opportunity I've ever seen. I could run through my price targets with you, or you could look through different mathematics that I've published. I have a paper, Looking Glass Education. Please, please, please go to that. I'll thank you again for your contribution there. And this is what makes the community great. Why? Because, you care. You're giving your time and your energy for free for now to help make the world a better place. So I'm happy to be on your podcast here. I don't care if it was number 1 or if it's number 1,000. I'll do this because you're a good person. I like to think I'm a better person than average. I'll just do what I need to do to try and spread some of my experience to the people that don't get taught it, because firstly, the education system doesn't do it. Secondly, their job may pay them not to to understand what rent seekers they are. They might work on a trading desk. They might work for a credit card company. They're paid to rape the system. That's how they make money. Okay, it is what it is.
Step at a time, baby steps, but baby steps that are leading to an avalanche, or a waterfall. So I have absolutely adored meeting you, Greg. What an absolute pleasure. You are
Thank you.
a delight and a joy, and the medicine that this world
Oh, well,
needs.
thank you. Well, yeah, little bits. I mean, there's guys, and again, I'm just part of one of many, right? Jeff Booth, Larry Lepard, Daz B, Seb Bunny, yourself. You know, we're growing, and we are not. We need to win. We have to win. We will win for the kids. We don't have a choice. So let's get at it.
Hear, hear. I will drink to that. My
Cheers.
cup of tea. You be well, my friend. An absolute pleasure. I hope to meet you in person, maybe at next.
I want to come to one of those Bitcoin Bash things, or Bush Bash Bitcoin.
Oh,
or
the
whatever
Bush
you guys
Bashers.
are.
Yeah. There's going to be one in Victoria in February. Come on along, Beachwear.
It's not a 0% chance. Okay, it's not huge, but it's greater than zero that I would come. So, all right.
That would
Thank
be
you so
outstanding.
much.
I'll stay in touch with you about.
All right, Carrie. Thank you again.
Be
Good
well.
night. Great
Take
meeting
care.
you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye for now. Bye. This episode of Bitcoin People brought to you by F2F Communications, helping you with your pitches, your presentations, your conferences, and your day in and day out business communications.